"Your husband is brain dead," my twin told my wife. "I'm here for you now." She believed him, moved him into our home, slept in our bed. She didn't know I was still alive, and that I'd set up security questions only I could answer. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 38 years old. I worked as an investment advisor in Lake Tahoe for 15 years before everything changed. You know the view from the North Shore at sunset. That's where I built my life. Nice house, overlooking the water. Good reputation in the community. The kind of stability my brother Darren never managed to find. Identical twins. Same face. Different fortunes. That's what people always said about us. I had the career. The lake house. Emma, my college sweetheart, turned wife of 12 years. Darren had potential. Always potential. That was my diplomatic way of saying he couldn't hold a job longer than 6 months or maintain a relationship past the honeymoon phase. Still, he was my brother, my identical twin. Sometimes when I looked at him, it was like seeing an alternate version of myself, the version where I made different choices. I always helped him out. Money when he needed it, connections for job interviews, a place to crash between apartments. What else could I do? His face was my face. His blood was my blood. I sometimes think that's why he hated me so much, though he never said it directly. Having me as a mirror probably made his failures seem worse. April 17th last year. That's when everything changed. I was rock climbing with some clients, part business, part pleasure. I'd done that route 8 times before, completely routine. Except that day, a support pin gave way. 40-foot fall, cracked my helmet against the rocks. Massive head trauma. They didn't think I'd survive the first night, but I did. Then I didn't wake up. 3 days became 3 weeks. Weeks became months. Coma with irreversible brain damage was the diagnosis. Emma was there every day at first. I know because later I checked the visitor logs every single day for the first 2 months. Then Darren started coming too, then just Darren. "I'll give Emma a break," he told the nurses. "This is so hard on her." What nobody realized, what nobody could have known, was that Darren had made a decision. If I couldn't live my life, he would do it for me. It started small, from what I've pieced together, using my credit cards for what he called family expenses, then accessing my investment accounts for medical bills. Darren was always good with computers, not as good as he thought, but good enough to cause damage. The hospital bills were legitimate at first, but then there were withdrawals for other things. A new television, dining at high-end restaurants, weekend trips with Emma to help her cope. All of this while I lay there, breathing through tubes. 3 months after my accident, Darren convinced Emma that maintaining 2 separate apartments made no financial sense. He'd let me move in to help with expenses while Daniel recovers. From what my neighbor later told me, it was seamless. One day, there was just 2 of me coming and going from my house, except one was conscious and the other was me, lying in a hospital bed. I found out later that Darren told people different stories. To some, he was filling in at my job temporarily. To others, he was managing Daniel's affairs. To my closest clients, he became me handling their portfolios, making investments, collecting commissions. Same face, same voice. Who would question it? The day Emma stopped visiting, according to the log, was exactly 6 months after my accident, October 18th. I remember the date because the nurse had written it down with a little sad face next to it. 6 months is when doctors start using words like persistent vegetative state and minimal chances of meaningful recovery. I imagine the conversation Darren had with her, sitting at our kitchen table, my kitchen table, taking her hands in his. "The doctors say we need to be realistic now. He wouldn't want us to put our lives on hold forever." What I know for certain is that he showed her medical reports, falsified brain scans. The original showed minimal activity. His versions showed none. He told her there was no hope, that the man she loved was already gone. All that remained was a body that used to be her husband. And then one night, Darren kissed her, not as a brother-in-law offering comfort. He kissed her the way I used to kiss her, and she hesitated, confused by looking at my face but knowing it wasn't me. Then she kissed him back. I know this because Emma told me later, her voice hollow with shame. "I thought you were gone," she said, "and he was. He was so much like you, but he was here." The last thing Darren said to my doctor 14 months after my accident was, "We're moving Emma to Arizona for her job. Transfer Daniel to long-term care facility. We'll handle the bills remotely." And then he simply erased me, stopped the visits completely. My mail was forwarded to a P.O. box he controlled. My social media accounts announced a fresh start in Scottsdale. Posts appeared showing my face, his face, at Grand Canyon hiking trails and Phoenix restaurants. Meanwhile, I remained at County General, officially classified as a minimal consciousness case, with family pursuing long-term care options. 14 months after my accident, I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was a ceiling tile with a water stain shaped like Australia. I stared at it for what felt like hours before I realized I was conscious. Actually conscious. The TV in the corner was playing a news channel. A different president was in office than the one I remembered. When the nurse came in and saw my eyes tracking her movement, she dropped her clipboard. 2 doctors rushed in. Tests followed. Basic neural response, language comprehension. I couldn't speak yet, but I could blink once for yes, twice for no. "Do you know your name?" 1 blink. "Are you Daniel Mercer?" 1 blink. "Do you know where you are?" 2 blinks. "You're in County General Hospital. You've been in a coma." 1 blink. "Do you remember what happened to you?" 1 blink. The doctors called it a miracle. The neural pathways had slowly rebuilt themselves. My brain had rewired around the damage while I slept. They said the chances of this type of recovery were less than 1%. "We should call your family right away," the head doctor said. 2 blinks. No. They were confused by this. Thought maybe I didn't understand. "Your wife, Emma, and your brother has been handling your affairs. They'll be overjoyed." 2 blinks. Harder this time. "Mr. Mercer, are you sure? They should know you're awake." I managed to form my first word then, raspy, almost inaudible. "Wait." The head doctor looked concerned but nodded. "All right. We'll wait until you're stronger. It's your decision." I spent the next 3 weeks in intensive rehabilitation, speech therapy, physical therapy, cognitive tests. I didn't tell them why I didn't want my family contacted, just insisted I needed time before facing them. The staff assumed it was pride, that I didn't want my wife to see me until I could walk and talk properly again. The reality was much colder. I needed time to think, to plan, to understand exactly what had happened while I was gone. When I was finally strong enough to use a phone by myself, I called my home number, my number. On my nightstand, next to what used to be my side of the bed, Darren answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" Just that one word in my voice, coming from him, sent ice through my veins. "Darren, it's Daniel." Silence. Then, "Daniel? That's impossible. The doctors said you were brain dead." I could hear Emma in the background asking who was calling. "Wrong number," Darren said, and hung up. I didn't call back, didn't contact the police. Didn't rant or throw things or break down crying like people might expect. I just sat there, phone in hand, thinking. The nurse came in, saw my expression. "Bad news?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just confirmation." That night, I began my list. Assets, accounts, properties. Everything I owned that Darren might have accessed. Everything I needed to reclaim. I worked backward from memory, reconstructing my financial life. I also began my second list, evidence. What could I prove? What records existed that would show Darren wasn't me? What digital breadcrumbs had he left? Where were the weak points in his deception? Most importantly, I remembered something Darren didn't know about. 6 years earlier, after he'd impersonated me to get a loan, I'd established specific security protocols with my bank and investment firms. Biometric verification, in-person identity confirmation requirements. Specific questions only I would know the answers to. I'd set them up as insurance against exactly this kind of scenario, though I never imagined it would happen while I was in a coma. The question was, had he somehow bypassed these protections? Or had the systems quietly been flagging his activities all along? I requested my medical records. I needed to know who had been making decisions, who had been signing forms, who had been paying the bills. I needed documentation of every visitor, every phone call, every change in my status. "You're very methodical for someone who just woke up from a coma," the hospital administrator observed as I made my requests. "I'm an investment advisor," I replied. "Details matter." What Darren never understood about me was that I'd always been prepared for betrayal, not specifically from him, just in general. In my line of work, you see what happens when trust is the only safeguard. You see what happens when people don't have backup plans. So I had backup plans, digital breadcrumbs, dead man switches, security questions only I would know, bank alerts for unusual activity. 3 days after I regained consciousness, I asked my physical therapist for a secure laptop, said I needed to check some things for my peace of mind. She hesitated, then brought in her personal computer. "Just don't tell anyone I let you do this." First, I checked my email. Password still worked. Thousands of unread messages. I sorted by sender and started with my bank. 14 security alerts, all acknowledged and resolved by me over the phone. Investment firm, 9 verification requests for large transfers, all confirmed through the secondary authentication system. Then I checked my credit report. 5 new accounts opened in my name over the past year, 2 mortgages, 3 credit cards, all current on payments, thankfully. At least Darren wasn't destroying my credit score while stealing my life. Next came social media. My profile showed a completely different life than the one I remembered. Photos of Darren with Emma at places I'd never been. Captions about fresh starts and new beginnings. A post from 3 months earlier announced, "Excited to share that Emma and I are expecting baby Mercer arriving in June." I stared at those words for a long time, read them over and over, let them sink in. Emma was pregnant with Darren's child, while legally she was still my wife. I closed the laptop then, handed it back to the therapist, thanked her. "And did you find what you needed?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I know exactly where things stand now." That night, I made 2 calls from the hospital phone. First to a lawyer I'd worked with on estate planning, left a message with his service. "This is Daniel Mercer. I need to speak with you as soon as possible about an identity theft situation. It's urgent and confidential." The second call was to a private investigator I'd once hired to vet a potential business partner. Same message, different focus. "I need documentation of someone impersonating me while I was incapacitated." Then I went back to my rehabilitation with renewed purpose. Every arm lift, every shaky step, every speech exercise. They weren't just about recovery anymore. They were preparation. My doctor noticed the change. "You seem more determined today." "I have clarity now," I said. "I know what I need to do." 3 weeks later, I was discharged from the hospital. The doctor called it remarkable progress. I called it necessary. I didn't go home. Instead, I checked into a hotel using cash and my driver's license, which the hospital had kept with my personal effects. The photo was older, taken before the accident, but it was still valid, still legally me. From the hotel, I made my first real move. I went to my bank in person. The branch manager didn't recognize me at first. I was thinner, paler. My hair had been cut differently in the hospital than how I used to wear it, but my ID matched. And when I began discussing the security protocols I'd established years earlier, recognition dawned in his eyes. "Mr. Mercer, but you were just here last week." "No," I said. "That wasn't me." I requested the security camera footage from that visit. He hesitated, mentioned privacy policies and procedures. I looked him directly in the eyes. "James, we've known each other for 12 years. I set up those special verification protocols with you personally. Remember why? Because my identical twin brother had impersonated me before, and now he's done it again. while I was in a coma, recovering from a head injury. I need that footage." James stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded and picked up his phone. "Barbara, pull the security footage from last Tuesday when Daniel Mercer was in, and access the special verification notes on his account. To me," he said, "if what you're saying is true, we have a serious security breach." "I am aware," I replied. 30 minutes later, I was watching the footage. Darren, wearing my clothes, my watch, my life, standing at the counter, smiling my smile, using my account. But there was one key difference. When asked the special verification question, "What was the name of your first investment client?" he had answered, "Robert Jansen." Wrong. It was Margaret Whitley. I'd never told him that story. The system had flagged it, but the teller had overridden the alert because, as she explained, he looked exactly like the photo ID and had all the other information correct. I turned to James. "I want to see every transaction on my accounts for the past 14 months. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every change of address, everything." James nodded, now fully convinced. "Of course, Mr. Mercer. And we'll need to report this to our fraud department immediately." "Not yet," I said. "I'm building a case first. If you alert him now, things will get complicated. I need comprehensive documentation before anyone raises alarms." James looked uncomfortable, but agreed. "I understand. But I should inform you that significant funds have been moved recently. Your investment portfolio has been nearly liquidated over the past 3 months. "Show me." The numbers were staggering. Nearly $2 million moved to new accounts. Property equity extracted through second mortgages, investment funds consolidated and transferred. "He's planning something," I said, more to myself than to James. "Sir, the pattern. He's gathering liquid assets, getting ready to move them somewhere less traceable." James hesitated. "Mr. Mercer, given the circumstances, should we freeze the accounts now?" I considered this for a moment. "No, not yet. If we freeze everything, he'll know someone's onto him. But I want alerts on any transaction over $5,000 from this point forward. Can you set that up without him knowing?" "Yes. Secondary notification to what number or email?" "The ones on file are presumably compromised." I gave him my lawyer's contact information. "Send everything there. And I need copies of all these records. Every transaction, every flag, every piece of evidence you have that the man accessing my accounts wasn't me." As I left the bank with a thick envelope of documents, I felt something I hadn't experienced since waking up in the hospital. Not anger, not even determination, control. I was taking back control. For the next 2 weeks, I gathered evidence methodically. The bank records showed Darren had been systematically liquidating my investments. Our marriage had no prenuptial agreement, so legally, he could access everything as me. The private investigator documented Darren living in my house, driving my car, working with my clients. Most importantly, medical records confirmed that Darren had been making my healthcare decisions, had signed forms as my identical twin with medical power of attorney, had shown the doctors falsified documents suggesting I had given him this authority years earlier. But he'd made critical mistakes. The biggest was attempting to use my professional credentials. Investment advising requires fingerprints on file with regulatory authorities. Identical twins don't have identical fingerprints. I met with my lawyer, Harrison Wells, at his office after hours. No receptionist. No other clients, just us and 4 boxes of evidence. "I've seen some identity theft cases in my time," Harrison said, reviewing the documents. "But nothing like this. Your own twin, while you were in a coma. It's methodical." I finished for him. Calculated. He saw an opportunity and took it. "And your wife, Emma, you think she knows?" I placed a printed screenshot of the pregnancy announcement on his desk. "She knows it's not me. Whether she knows the full extent of his financial maneuvers is another question. I doubt it. Darren would compartmentalize, keep her focused on the emotional aspects while he handled the money." Harrison shook his head. This is going to be messy, Daniel. Multiple jurisdictions, criminal and civil components. Your marriage, your assets, your identity, everything's entangled. I know. That's why I've been careful. Gathering evidence before making any moves. So what's the plan? I laid it out step by step. First, secure indisputable proof of my identity. DNA tests, fingerprints, specialized medical verification of my healed brain injury. Second, document every instance of fraud, financial, medical, professional. Third, prepare the legal actions. Criminal charges against Darren, divorce proceedings against Emma, emergency injunctions against any further financial transactions. And then? Harrison asked. Then I confront them. You want to be in the same room with the brother who stole your life and the wife who's carrying his child. Is that wise? I looked at him steadily. It's necessary. Not for revenge, for closure. I need to see their faces when they realize it's over. Harrison didn't look convinced, but he nodded. It's your call, but I want a security team present, and everything recorded. Agreed. We spent the next 3 hours finalizing the strategy. By the time I left his office, every detail was in place, every contingency considered, every legal document prepared. The next day, I underwent comprehensive identity verification, fingerprints, DNA testing, medical examination, confirming the healed brain trauma consistent with my accident and subsequent recovery. The results were expedited through Harrison's connections. 3 days later, everything was ready. I sent a text message from a new phone to my old number, the one Darren now used. We need to talk about Daniel Mercer, your brother, the one you replaced. Come to 1850, Lakeview Drive, Suite 200, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone. The address was Harrison's office. The stage was set. At 9:58 the next morning, Harrison and I watched the security feed as Darren arrived. Not alone, Emma was with him. She was visibly pregnant, maybe 6 months along. They both looked nervous, uncertain. Are you ready? Harrison asked me. I straightened my tie, new clothes, tailored to fit my thinner frame. Yes. I entered the conference room from a side door as they were taking seats at the large table. For a moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Emma saw me first. Her face went white, hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Daniel, she whispered. Darren turned. Our identical faces locked eyes. His expression shifted from shock to calculation in an instant. That's not possible, he said. You're not Daniel. You can't be. I said nothing, just placed a folder on the table and slid it toward them. What is this? Darren asked, not touching it. Evidence, I replied. My voice was still raspy from months of disuse, making the words sound like judgment itself. Emma opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was everything. Bank records, medical files, security camera footage, DNA test results, the falsified power of attorney documents, the pregnancy announcement with timestamps, everything. How? Darren began. I finally spoke. You made the same mistake you always made, Darren. You underestimated me. You thought if you looked like me, you could be me. But you missed the details. I turned to Emma. He told you I was brain dead, showed you falsified scans, convinced you to move on. With him, she couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face. I don't blame you for believing him, I continued. He had my face, my voice, and the doctors weren't optimistic. But I never gave him power of attorney. I never authorized him to access my accounts, and I certainly never died. Darren found his voice. You can't prove any of this. I gestured to the folder. I already have. Your fingerprints aren't mine. Your signature doesn't perfectly match. The security questions you answered at my bank were wrong. Small details, but they add up. Harrison entered then, followed by 2 police officers. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, he said formally. I'm Daniel's attorney. These officers have some questions about potential fraud, identity theft, and falsification of medical directives. Darren stood up quickly. This is ridiculous. He abandoned us, abandoned her. I stepped in because someone had to. I was in a coma, I said quietly, recovering, not abandoning anyone. The officers moved forward. One of them addressed Darren. "Sir, we need you to come with us to answer some questions." Darren looked at me with pure hatred. "You would do this? To your own brother? After everything I did to keep your life together while you were gone?" I met his gaze steadily. "You didn't keep my life together. You took it for yourself." As they led him out, Emma remained seated, still staring at the documents. "What happens now?" she asked without looking up. "Legally, divorce proceedings, division of assets, criminal charges against Darren." I kept my voice neutral. "The rest is complicated by your condition." Her hand moved to her stomach again. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. The doctors said what Darren told them to say," I corrected her. "What he wanted you to hear." She finally looked up at me. "I'm so sorry." I nodded once. "I know, but sorry doesn't undo this." Before leaving, I placed a business card on the table. "This is the contact information for my lawyer. All communication should go through him from now on." I walked out without looking back. In the hallway, Harrison caught up with me. "That was restrained," he observed. "What were you expecting? Shouting, violence? Most people would have wanted some sort of emotional release after what you've been through." I considered this as we walked to the elevator. The Daniel they replaced would have wanted that. The Daniel who woke up from that. The legal machinery moved with surprising speed after that. Darren was arrested on multiple felony charges: identity theft, fraud, falsification of medical documents. The evidence was overwhelming. He'd been thorough in becoming me, which meant he'd left a clear trail of documentation proving he wasn't. Emma filed for divorce before I could. Her lawyers cited abandonment as grounds. My lawyers countered with adultery. Neither position was technically accurate given the circumstances, but we eventually settled on irreconcilable differences in the final papers. The financial disentanglement was complex. Darren had moved nearly $3 million in assets, but most were recovered. The house, our house, was sold, the proceeds split according to the settlement agreement. Throughout all of this, I maintained my distance, answered questions when required for legal proceedings, provided documentation when requested, but I didn't engage emotionally, didn't reach out to mutual friends to explain my side, didn't post on social media to reclaim my digital presence. I simply focused on rebuilding. 4 months after the confrontation, Darren accepted a plea deal, 8 years in state prison, eligible for parole in 5, financial restitution, no contact orders. The day he was sentenced, I received a letter from him. I recognized his handwriting immediately, nearly identical to mine, but with sharper angles, heavier pressure on the page. "Daniel," it began, "you won. You got your revenge. Are you satisfied? Do you feel whole again? Because I don't. I never did. Not even when I was living your life. There was always something missing, some essential piece that made you successful and me not. I thought if I lived as you, I'd find it, understand it, but I never did." The letter continued for pages, justifications, accusations, eventually something resembling remorse, though never a clear apology. I read it once, then filed it with the rest of the legal documents. Evidence of a chapter closing. Emma gave birth in June, as the pregnancy announcement had predicted. A boy. She named him Nathan, neither a family name nor one we had ever discussed during our marriage. A clean break from both sides of his complicated origins. Her lawyer contacted mine about visitation, custody arrangements. There was some question about my legal standing as her husband at the time of conception. I waived all rights and responsibilities, signed whatever was needed to make a clean separation. The child was not mine in any sense that mattered. By late summer, the media interest had faded. The twin deception, or Coma identity theft, as various outlets had dubbed it, became yesterday's curiosity. Other scandals took its place in the public consciousness. I moved to Portland. Different state, different climate, different field entirely. I went back to school for computer security. Used my own case as a dissertation topic. Identity verification in the age of digital twins. Became something of an expert in the field. Sometimes I would get emails from former clients, friends, or acquaintances who had finally heard what happened. They always followed a pattern: shock, sympathy, questions about my recovery, awkward mentions of interactions they'd had with me that were actually with Darren. I answered politely but briefly, never elaborated, never complained, just acknowledged the facts and moved on. One former colleague asked directly, "Aren't you angry after everything he took from you?" I considered my response carefully before writing, "Anger requires energy I needed for rebuilding. It wasn't a luxury I could afford." That was true as far as it went, but the deeper truth was that anger would have meant Darren still had power over me, still controlled some part of my emotional landscape, and I was done being controlled. 3 years after waking up, I received an email from Emma, the first direct communication since that day in Harrison's office. The subject line was simple: Nathan's birthday. The message contained a photo of a smiling toddler with cake-smeared cheeks, dark hair, my jawline, Darren's eyes, or my eyes, our eyes. "I thought you might want to see him," she wrote. "He's happy, healthy, smart. I tell him stories about his Uncle Daniel sometimes, the real Daniel, the good one." I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to feel something, trying to find the right emotional response. What was appropriate in this unprecedented situation? Grief for the child that could have been mine under different circumstances. Resentment that she was reaching out now. Something else entirely. In the end, I simply wrote back, "Thank you for sharing this. He looks happy. I'm glad." I didn't ask for more photos, didn't suggest meeting him someday. Some doors are better left closed. 6 months later, I published my first book on identity security. It became a standard text in the field, led to consulting work with major financial institutions, speaking engagements, a completely different career trajectory than I'd been on before the accident. Last year, I received another unexpected message, this one from the parole board. Darren was up for early release. They wanted my input as the primary victim of his crimes. I wrote a single paragraph. Darren Mercer's actions were calculated, sustained, and deeply damaging. However, I do not object to his parole if he has demonstrated genuine rehabilitation and remorse. My only request is that the existing no-contact orders remain in place permanently. He was released 2 months later, moved to Florida, according to the parole officer's update. As far from Portland, from me, as he could get within the continental United States. Sometimes people ask if I've forgiven him. It's a complicated question. Forgiveness implies emotional resolution, a spiritual accounting. What I've done is more practical. I've processed what happened, incorporated it into my understanding of the world and moved forward. I date occasionally now, nothing serious. I'm transparent about my past when the relationship reaches that point. Most women find the story too bizarre, too heavy. They politely drift away after hearing it. I don't blame them. Last month, I was at a cybersecurity conference in Chicago. After my presentation, a man approached me, silver-haired, well-dressed. I recognized him immediately. James, the bank manager from Lake Tahoe. "Mr. Mercer," he said, extending his hand, "I've followed your career with interest. Your work on biometric verification protocols has been invaluable to the banking industry." "Thank you," I replied, shaking his hand. I had good motivation to solve those particular problems. He nodded, understanding the understatement. "I always wondered, how did you stay so calm through all of it? When you first came into my office that day, most people would have been raging, demanding immediate action." I considered his question carefully. "Uday, when your life has been completely taken from you, rage feels like an indulgence, like a luxury for people who still have something left to lose. I needed precision more than I needed catharsis." James seemed to accept this answer. He asked if I'd consider consulting for his bank's new security division. I gave him my card. Business continued. That night in my hotel room, I found myself looking at old photos, Emma and me on our wedding day. Darren standing beside me as best man. both of us smiling identical smiles at the camera, both believing in that moment that our futures would be intertwined but separate, neither imagining how completely one would consume the other. People often ask if I'm afraid it could happen again, if I worry about looking over my shoulder, seeing my own face approaching. The truth is more complicated. I'm not afraid of Darren anymore. I'm wary of the human capacity for self-justification, the ability we all have to convince ourselves that taking what isn't ours is somehow deserved. In the end, what separated Darren and me wasn't our faces or our DNA or even our opportunities. It was something more fundamental, something he never understood, even when he was living my life. Having the same face never meant having the same character. Twin brother stole my wife while I was in a coma, but he forgot about the security questions.